All right. Well, welcome, students. We're here with Frank Baker. And Frank and I have known each other for some time. We've bumped into each other at conferences, and I have admired his work with the Media Literacy Clearinghouse, his work with instruction, the resources he's gathered for the world of education. And I'm going to have him introduce himself, and then we'll talk a little bit about how librarians can really make a difference in terms of kids and learning and media literacy. Frank, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Joyce. It's a pleasure to be with you and with your students. I'll give you a brief overview. I worked in television news for about 9 years. The last stop was Orlando, Florida, where I joined the public school system there, and I was a administrator in charge of instructional television and distance learning. And while I was there, I was in charge, among other things, of purchasing the instructional videos and films that teachers would use in the classroom. And I also managed a large television production facility. So I took it upon myself one day to sit in some of the classrooms that I knew the teachers were using our materials. And I was really surprised when I noticed the teachers were not engaging students in any previewing questions before they showed the video. They didn't set it up at all. They didn't introduce any vocabulary that students might have heard in the video. And they didn't do any post-viewing questions, checking for understanding. And so I learned that all of this was part of critical viewing skills. And critical viewing skills are a major part of what we now call media literacy. So I started to gather media literacy materials and to meet with the librarians and talk to them about their role. In many ways, they held on their shelves the videos that teachers would use. That they were also buying their own videos for teacher use. And I would scan the bookshelves looking for books about media. And finding very few was very frustrating. So I went to the associate superintendent and requested an opportunity to conduct a workshop with teachers. Now, of course, I had come out of journalism school, so I really didn't have any education training, but I wanted to try to engage teachers in what I thought would be beneficial, looking at popular culture and the news and using those as the hooks to student learning. And so the associate superintendent said, yeah, you can do a workshop. And so the first workshop I ever did was called TV toy commercials and how they influence kids. And I'll never forget, a teacher raised her hand and said, Mr. Baker, you mean I could be recording those Saturday morning cartoons, shows, and using those commercials? And I said, absolutely. And she said, well, how would I use them? And I said, well, we're supposed to teach the techniques of persuasion, so that would be one way. And how about the techniques of production? How is this all put together? And so that got me started down the road of media literacy and education and teacher training. A couple of years later, the school system partnered with the Orlando Sentinel newspaper, and we brought in a consultant, and we went through how political campaign advertising is persuasive and what are those techniques and what should we know when we watch those campaign ads. So I started collecting material and purchasing books, and I thought, I need to probably put all of this on a website. And so I did. I started the Media Literacy Clearinghouse, resource for educators who wanted to know, A, what is media literacy, and B, what are some resources for me to consider using into the classroom. And one of my speaking engagements down the road was in Columbus, Ohio, where I was actually approached to write a book. And so my first book was for elementary, and it was called Coming Distractions, Questioning Movies, published by Capstone Press. And what I liked about this series of books about media literacy was they all included the same critical thinking questions. And the media literacy community has embraced critical thinking and critical viewing questions, even going so far as to produce a handout of the kinds of questions students should consider. My second book was published by Greenwood Press, and it's for middle and high school students, entitled Political Campaigns and Political Advertising, a Media Literacy Guide, which I really enjoyed researching how presidential candidates use the media. And my most recent book is Media Literacy in the K-12 Classroom, published by ISTE, and it's now in its second edition. And so in addition, Joyce, I also write a regular column at middleweb.com. This is a website for middle grade educators. And I look at the popular culture and I look at what's going on in the news, and I try to make the connection to media literacy. And why would a teacher bring a photo from a newspaper into the classroom? Why would a teacher use a film poster in the classroom? So my approach, if I may, over the years has been kind of three-pronged. All of my workshops start with visual literacy, like to look at an image. How do we close read an image? And from the visual literacy part of my workshop, I move into advertising. So I will engage audiences in a print ad as well as a commercial. And so now I'm moving into the moving images. And so the third part of my workshop and my presentations always involves the moving images, or what I like to call the language of the moving images, that all media are in fact texts. What I like to make in my work is that all media involve writing. Yet when I pick up a English language arts textbook in our country, I don't find that media is acknowledged as text. Media is not acknowledged as literacy, and that's been my approach. And I'm a member of the National Council of Teachers of English, and so I'm really pleased when I see position statements and other things come out of NCTE that not only acknowledge media, teachers with language arts to not only use media, but to engage students in analyzing and deconstructing and creating media messages. So a lot of what I do is analyzing, but that's part of media literacy. The other part, as you know, Joyce, is engaging students in making their own media. And so I do see lots of schools engaging kids in making media, but sometimes those same schools are not engaging those same students in analyzing media. So I'm really here to encourage us to consider when we want to teach media literacy, how do we engage young people in both analyzing and creating media?
Okay, thanks, Frank. So what you really did for me was to make the case of all of these skills as really literacy. We are reading, comprehending, understanding, communicating and sharing, not just using text, but using media as text. And this is an important literacy. It's just as important as any other literacy. In fact, it may be the umbrella. This may be the encompassing one. We've had arguments in various disciplines about whether it's media or information literacy, but it is well within the realm of the school librarian to promote this kind of literacy, and it's well within our own skill set to do this thing. You talk about being a former journalist, and I think we had a conversation about this last week. Librarians interrogate sources in the same way that journalists approach interrogating a story and the people involved and the evidence involved in a story. And that kind of mindset is very, very important for young people. Can you talk a little bit? We talked about what was not happening in schools and some of the ways you've been working with teachers, but why is this so important and why now?
Well, that's a great question. And I would tell your audience to think about all of the ways media has been a part of their lives from even when they were younger, how important media was. Your television shows growing up, who were your favorite music performers? What movies genres did you like? So we have always gravitated to media. Then I would tell your audience, what are your students' experiences with media today? And we know from the Pew studies and others that young people spend, I think it's an average of 7+ hours a day in front of some kind of media. So they have access, they are paying attention to it, and it's powerful, it's influential, but how do they think about what they are exposed to today? Uh, I think the librarian and the teacher of the 21st century has to meet students where they are. So if a student is into uh, uh, music videos, for example, that's a great way to explore that they didn't make the music video first. Someone had to actually write that song first, and then of course they had to go into a studio and produce it and edit it. And what's involved? What are the techniques? This is one of my favorite words. What techniques are used by media makers, and what do we know about those techniques, and what do we not know? As an example, I've become a big fan lately of the movies, and I am actually more fascinated not by the movie, but how the movie was made and the craft people who are involved. So I incorporate a lot of that into my workshops. So we know young people are fascinated by the media. I walk into a school library in 2017 and I scan the bookshelves for books about the media. I find very few. And that to me is huge, huge disconnect. Yes, students can find information about media online, but I'm still a big book person. I want to be able to walk in and pick up a book and say, oh, you're into photography. Well, do you know the rule of thirds? Do you know that graphic designers use a rule of thirds in photography, in magazine production, in movie stills, in cinematography? So when we begin to teach students the rules, I think they better help them with their appreciation of the media. So I see schools engaging young people in media making, and here I'm talking about photography and videography, but I don't see these same schools engaging young people in understanding the visual literacy rules and the language of photography. And so I think we have opportunity to do just that. Before you ever pick up that camera, what should you know? And I'm a bit of an amateur photographer myself, and before I learned the rule of thirds, I would go to the coast of South Carolina and I would shoot the sunrise over the coast, and the sun would always be in the middle of my frame. Well, the rule of thirds says a more aesthetically pleasing image moves the subject matter one of the crosshairs in the rule of thirds. So upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. Sure enough, when I started to engage the rule of thirds in my own, it was much better.
Yeah, and I remember picking that up in workshops on video literacy with Marco Torres quite a while back, and going, "Oh my God, how did I not know that?" Yeah, so there just are so many things to learn, and they're not necessarily in our standards. And librarians can do a lot of this teaching. It's interesting. I think we think of media literacy as a relatively new skill because of the fake news stuff that's going on. But I remember being a Library of Congress fellow and studying the work of Matthew Brady and his team of photographers in the Civil War, and how to deconstruct the photographs that they carefully crafted to tell a story rather than to actually be newsy. Depending upon what kind of victory they wanted to share or what they wanted their audience to feel. So people have been manipulating photographs in media for a very long time, and we certainly have propaganda, and we have all those ads that we can analyze. Frank, I wondered if you could point to some of the things that my students would find if they dug in deep in the Media Literacy Clearinghouse. I have some classic favorites, but maybe what are yours?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the Civil War because I use an image. This is on my website. I use an image from the Civil War as the home of the rebel sharpshooters' den. It
I
was
know.
photographed in Gettysburg, and there's a dead soldier lying horizontal in the lower third of the frame, and his rifle is leaning up against this wall. And lo and behold, Alexander Gardner, who is credited with having taken that photo, uh, is known to have actually moved the body of the soldier to that location and put the gun position. Now, the eyes of 1860s never questioned the manipulation of the image. Yet we know that it was manipulated. And so since the beginning of photography, we have been manipulating images. So I like to ask students, can you recognize when an image has been altered? And so today I'm engaging a lot of my audiences in magazine covers, only because most of us have magazines at home or at school, and we can bring those into the classroom to do a cover deconstruction. Lately, I have been to educators in the state of South Carolina, and they've taught me a lot about um, how to look at a magazine cover and what to see and what to notice. And I'm asking the question, how is a magazine cover like an advertisement? We see it on the grocery store checkout stand, or we see it at the Barnes and Noble, periodical stand there. And each of them, to me, screams, pick me up, look at me, buy me. And so every day or every week, hundreds of magazines compete for our attention. It is an attention economy. Everybody wants our attention. So again, what techniques are they employing to get our attention? So in some of my workshops, and this again is on my website, I'll throw up 3 different magazine covers, and they all feature the same celebrity or sports personality. So I have one with LeBron James, I have another with Jennifer Lawrence, and we will explore body language, expression, font, color, layout, all of those things. And when I worked recently with some middle school students, the question was, who is the audience for this periodical? And a lot of them did not know. And I said, well, if you flip through the magazine for just a minute and make a list of the type of ads in it, become clear who the demographic. So, for example, LeBron James on Black Enterprise magazine, who is likely to read this magazine? And we can explore even further who owns the magazine and what else do they own. We can ask students to explore the media in their community. They see a billboard and they see at the bottom of the billboard says CBS News. Did you know that CBS News was into billboards? Who owns the radio stations, the cable companies, the newspapers in your community? What do they cover in the news? And my favorite media literacy question, what do they not cover? And so I don't think in many ways a lot of us ever ask the question or consider what is left out of a media message, which is huge, absolutely huge. In fact, I can read a story on the front page of today's New York Times, which might start on A1 and then continue on A20. And I've read, 8 or 10,000 words, but do I know everything about that subject? And where could I go to get more information? And so I'm pleased today that there's a burgeoning new industry called the news literacy industry. And one of the news literacy projects actually partners teachers with journalists and broadcasters in their communities. And so I like to tell educators, invite a journalist, invite a broadcaster in, and have students begin to understand what he or she does as part of their job every day and learn more about uh, their role. I think it's quintessentially important. The other thing that I don't see happening that I wish was happening is I wish we took young people on field trips to advertising agencies, even a small advertising agency, which might have 5 or 10 people. They all are involved in unique jobs. They use specific techniques in their crafting of messages. And so I think that's really eye-opening at what is sometimes the closed doors of the advertising company and see what happens, because so much of what happens today is advertising.
Yeah, there are so many fascinating things that you just said, and I want to amplify just a couple of them. And one of the things that I conclude from some of what you just said in our previous conversations is this is not a black and white situation. It is a very messy, nuanced, critical thinking activity. And so when we have teachers who say, use these particular sources because I respect Time and Newsweek and the New York Times, it's far more complicated than that. All of these media, these are businesses, and they do have points of view. And I always carry with me a statement one of my teacher friends told me many years ago. There is no such thing as neutral text, and when we apply the notion of text across media, it is very hard to be neutral. And I wrote for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I am very conscious of the fact that whenever I wrote a story, I had so much control over that story. It was not a neutral story, although I tried to be honest and ethical, and I paid attention to journalists' code of ethics. I was always conscious of the fact that I was interviewing some people and not other people, that I was taking portions of quotes, that I wasn't using the full. I mean, I had to edit a story. I had to tell a story. The words I chose were words that maybe another writer would not have chosen. All of these things put together my personal lens on a particular story and may ignore some other lenses. And so what's missing is a very important part. What time in the story, what is that context? Also really important. So, and I love the idea that an activity like the one you just described can happen in any classroom, in any library. Grab a few magazines, grab a couple of articles that are on something similar or a couple of different commercials on the same topic and put them next to each other and see the different choices that the media creators have made about these things. So these are so doable and so important because this is such a pervasive setting, and our students are not trained in this, but they are trained in that kind of binary. Is this true or not true? So, as we negotiate truth, it's far more complicated than it's from the New York Times, it's good. So I want our students to get that, and to get that this is not an easy process.
Definitely not. I'll add one more regarding the magazines. I was recently in a middle school here in South Carolina, and on day one, students were actually given magazines that were outside their reading comfort, if you will. I really wanted them to be exposed to magazines that they would not see on the shelf at the middle school. So each student was assigned a specific magazine, and we went through a deconstruction and an analysis on day one. On day two, they came back to the library with the magazine they were assigned to, and we had preloaded magazine cover template software, and they were asked to redesign the magazine cover that they were assigned to. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most and satisfying activity I've ever done with young people, when we give them the control, let them make the decisions. So for a young lady who had a travel magazine, I said, the image you've chosen is good and the words are fine, but think about what's going to make somebody want to pick that up and really want to buy it. And she said, well, maybe we have a Hawaii giveaway little button. And I said, that's a great idea. And those are the kinds of things. I really want students to know what goes on behind the cover, what goes on behind the screen, what are the production techniques, who are the people, what are the careers, what are the skills needed in those careers. Because if I am a young person today and I think I want to go into media, what do I need to have? So, for example, the head of Pixar Animation today is preaching the importance of math and science. And I was in California recently and I went to an exhibit at the California Science Center entitled The Science Behind Pixar. And I thought, this is great. This is making the connection between the art, animation, and the classroom, science and math. And increasingly today, I'm really interested in that as well, because media literacy is not confined to just the English language arts. I can show a connection to media math, for example, using Super Bowl ads in the classroom, or having math teachers look at television ratings. And most teachers really don't know what a rating or a share of a TV show is, but those are important. Shows have to be rated, and why are they rated? And how does the advertiser use that information? Why is that important? You know, why is the Academy Awards interested in how many people watched the most recent broadcast? Why is that important? Well, it all translates back to dollars. Economics is huge in media literacy. Media, for the most part, are designed to make money, and we want students to understand that as well.
Thanks, Frank. I want to respect your time and I don't want to hold you too much more, but I would love you to just highlight a couple of the other real fabulous stuff, pieces of instruction that you have, or suggestions or scaffolds that you have on the Media Literacy Clearinghouse. Could you mention the Super Bowl? You referred to your Super Bowl ads area. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? And for people who are not that interested in sports and that kind of advertisement, the Academy Awards or those award shows, perhaps some of that.
Sure. One website that I'm really proud of, Joyce, is The Language of Film, in which I have broken down the language of film into categories. And if your audience doesn't understand the language of film, I describe it or define it as the tools and the techniques which imply meaning. So, photography section, there is a costuming section, there is a script writing section, there is a set design section. So each of the sections on the Language of Film website is divided into sections itself. There will always be a link to some current news story about that topic. There will be links to curriculum and lesson plans. There will be recommended books and videos, because I think today video has become very, very popular with advertisers, and it's very, very popular with users. And we know how many videos are uploaded to YouTube every day, and everybody has the capability of shooting video on their phones or their e-tablets. And so I decided to devote a lot of attention to what I call the language of film. And so a teacher who uses a film in the classroom, and another page that I'm proud of is my film study guide to Kill a Mockingbird. So I know most teachers use the book and the film in their classroom, but I don't know that many teach the language of film. So as an example, Atticus is standing at the jail when the mob arrives to try to take the prisoner out of the jail, and there is a scene where the camera is up behind Atticus's left shoulder, and it looks down on the mob. And I always ask students and teachers, do you know what it means when we shoot down on people? And most don't know that when we do shoot down on them, we we make them small and less powerful. We take their power away from them. Now we can reverse that, like Lenny Rosenstahl did in Triumph of the Will, and shoot Adolf Hitler from below. So a lot of those camera angles are looking up at Adolf Hitler, which made him look powerful. Well, I think we can teach even the youngest students where you put the camera has meaning. I use scenes from The Lion King with elementary students. So we meet Simba as a young, and we shoot down on him, and then when he's older, we shoot up at him. Why not send students out into the magazines and the newspaper and the internet and locate similar camera angles?
You know,
So it's
Frank,
not hard.
I just want to interrupt you because one thing we can do right now, and it's one of the assignments I've given my students, is to take a newsreel, bring it into a video annotation tool like ThingLink, and actually point to propaganda techniques, and point to camera angles and whose lens we're seeing this from, and point to rhetorical devices in video, and really get granular in terms, and TED Talks. Even TED Talks are really fabulous fodder for this kind of stuff. I mean, how is this particular speaker engaging the audience? What techniques is that person using? And it's very, very possible for students to analyze media using new strategies in the same way they would take apart a poem or a scene in Shakespeare. So we have the tools to logistically do that right now.
Absolutely. And so understanding media as text, understanding the techniques used by media makers is increasingly important. Some of the rhetoric that comes out of Washington, D.C., some of the stage crafting done by politicians is very, very important. The work of photojournalists who document our world and deliver images back to us they are so important to use in the classroom and to engage students in what you and I both know as close reading. And so my experience has been that most educators understand close reading as it applies to print, but they have not had the same experience close reading non-print. And so that's what I have been doing. In fact, I deliberately have been calling most of my workshops the last couple of years close reading of media text, because that's close reading is big in the Common Core, even though Common Core is not it does a disservice, in my opinion, to media literacy, but engage students in close reading if we take the time to teach teachers how to do just that.
I think if you are a Common Core school, nobody says you shouldn't use media for close reading. It is close reading. These activities can absolutely happen and achieve the same goal. I've seen people use music videos as text, and use the very same strategies recommended by all the folks who put together stuff about Common Core. So, I don't think we're bound by any kind of rules about what reading ought to look like, even when we're closely standard aligned schools. So anyway, Frank, I want to tell people, maybe to give my students some final words of advice as they go into their own libraries, and then let us know how we would be able to be in contact with you.
Well, thank you. My website is frankwbaker.com. I'm on Twitter at @fbaker. The Media Literacy Clearinghouse is on Facebook, and I would invite you to like us and follow us, because I am posting regularly there about media issues and media literacy. And I'd like to encourage those who are engaging students in media analysis and media creation to think about writing about your experiences in some publication. That could be a local newspaper or a journal. I think I would like to hear more success stories of teachers engaging students in media text, because it is happening. There are lots of success stories out there, and I really enjoy hearing from educators who believe that we need to spend more time helping young people understand fake news, understand photojournalism, understand the language of film, understand advertising, bias, propaganda, stereotypes. All of these things are important in a 21st century world.
Thank you, Frank. I'm so grateful for your time, and I know my students will benefit from your work and from listening to your wisdom here in this Voices of Literacy video. So I'm going to stop the broadcast now. And again, thank you.